Hi, everyone. My name is Regan Kopicus, and today I'm going to be taking you through what I call the simplification of NFPA 1001 for Saskatchewan volunteer fire departments. Our organization is called Quint Services, and we do stuff all over Saskatchewan and throughout Western Canada. One of our big things is making the emergency response world make sense. So something that's come about over the last while in my mind and in talking with some others, there's a little bit of confusion as to, first of all, what is a training program? What is the requirements for training? Why does a fire department have to train? What is the standard that we need to be training to? And I guess what regulatory bodies are saying we must train and what must we be training on? So, first things first, why do we have to train? Well, pretty simple. We got to be able to show up at an incident that we're called out to. We got to be able to deal with the situation that is at hand, and we got to be able to do that safely. That's really when you get down to the brass tacks, that is why we need to train. Now, on a regulatory side, why do we need to train? Well, we've got this thing called the Fire Safety Act of Saskatchewan. If you are not familiar with the Fire Safety Act of Saskatchewan, especially as a fire chief, a fire officer, if you are just somebody within your fire department who is stepping up to the plate, leading some training, or you just want to know a little bit more of the things that we need to do in Saskatchewan as a fire department, you need to be familiar with this document. I'm not going to say that you need to have it memorized, you need to know where things are. First of all, you need to know how to find it, and it's very easy to find. Actually, you can just Google Fire Safety Act of Saskatchewan. This document is going to come up. Within this document, what it lays out are the duties of a fire department. It's going to lay out the duties of the fire commissioner. It's going to spell out for you a term that we come across repeatedly, the authority having jurisdiction. The authority having jurisdiction in 99% of the municipalities of Saskatchewan, the authority having jurisdiction is the town itself or the council. And that town council or village or city, whoever it is, they appoint a local assistant who is typically known as the fire chief. And the fire chief is responsible for pretty much most of the duties that are laid out in the Fire Safety Act. One of those pieces is the training requirements. So the authority having jurisdiction actually determines the training requirements outside of what some other pieces of legislation say. So an authority having jurisdiction might say, well, we're going to train to everything that's found in the NFPA 1001 standard, which we'll talk about right away. They might say we're a municipality that has a lot of bodies of water around us, so we want to make sure that everybody in our fire department is trained to some competencies found in an NFPA 1006 standard, and so on and so on. A municipality or the authority having jurisdiction, you can't take training away. You can't go against what a regulation or overarching requirement says. You can only really meet or add on to what that says. So what else do we have? Today, I'm not going to go into the Fire Safety Act, but again, I encourage you folks to look at this, reach out if you have questions, reach out to us at Quint Services, reach out to your zone personnel, reach out to the Saskatchewan Public Safety Agency, who are the owners of this document and should be providing you with a little bit more information. What else says that we need to train? Well, right in our occupational health and safety regulations. So again, as fire department, even if you're volunteers being part of that fire department, you fall under this umbrella of working for your municipality. Our municipality, our authority having jurisdiction, has the responsibility to make sure that they are following the occupational health and safety regulations of Saskatchewan. And again, this is a document that is easily found. You can once again just Google OHS regulations of Saskatchewan. Part 32-4 in there says an employer, fire department, shall ensure that every firefighter receives the training necessary to ensure that the firefighter is able to carry out safely any emergency operation that the firefighter will be expected to carry out. B, the training required by Clause A is provided by competent persons. And C, a written record is kept of all training delivered to firefighters pursuant to this part. So again, very broad. In here, it doesn't state specifically that you must train to the 1001 standard, that you must train to what's found in a particular textbook, that sort of thing. It is saying that you got to be trained to safely carry out the expectations. And that training must be provided by competent persons, competent people. The occupational health and safety regulations of Saskatchewan, they further define what it means to be competent. Competent typically means that you're trained, means that you're knowledgeable, and that you're experienced. What else do we have? Well, we have, and you know what, not this is not meant to create tension or anything. We have something that is being implemented. We have, whether you agree with how it's been rolled out or not, we have the Saskatchewan minimum standards. And so whether you're a defensive, offensive, full service, wildland only, this particular document spells out a little bit more for you if you're trying to, or if you're following this Saskatchewan minimum standards training, or sorry, level of service that your particular department is providing. Within these documents, it spells out a few different items. Some of it's, there's some contradictory parts and that sort of thing, but overall, it's a document that is intended as a guide, and it helps people navigate what documentation they need to be showing for proving that their people are trained, what you need to be trained on, and so on and so on. Again, I think it's a document that has very good intentions. We just need a little bit more guidance and a little bit more support. And of course, with support, we need some budget to support making the requirements or the expectations out of this particular document happen. So, just to kind of pull those of you that are watching this, what are these? Well, what's this? The Essentials of Firefighting. All right, this is a textbook that I think a lot of you have come across, are familiar with, whether it's the 7th edition, 6th edition. Some of us remember even training on the 2nd edition. Well, actually, I'm sure some of you even remember training on the 1st edition. And now we have the 8th, and I believe they're working on the 9th. However, what is this? Well, this is a training program. That's it. It's not gospel. It is not requirements. This is simply a how-to. So this will have, it's got a chapter on self-contained breathing apparatus. How do what are the general parts of a self-contained breathing apparatus? What are some general ways to don an SCBA? That sort of thing. But again, this is not requirements. This is just general, hey, this is how you do something. We have, unfortunately, we have a lot of groups that will take what this says for gospel. And you know what? I mean, there's some very good materials that is found in this document. but it is a way. It's not the way. It is a way of performing a particular task. This action training online. You know what? There's a lot of fire departments. There's a lot of industrial groups that utilize this training throughout Saskatchewan. It is, it's an awesome program as well. It is a training program. What's nice about this one is it gives you some videos, video demonstrations of how particular tasks are performed, gives you some review questions. You click your way through it. And again, it's to give you some theoretical understanding of how to do something, a way of doing something. Less common here in Saskatchewan, but you move a couple provinces over, you'll find this one. Very similar to the essentials of firefighting, just another way. It is another training program that exists. Is it the way? No, it is a way. This, however, the National Fire Protection Association has developed what's known as the standard for firefighter qualifications, known as NFPA 1001-1001. Sometimes you'll hear somebody say, yeah, I got my 1001. All right, well, we're going to talk about what that means. More importantly, what we're going to do here today, more than anything, is talk about how close some of you are as fire departments or firefighters in actually meeting or even exceeding some of the requirements that are found in this particular standard. Really, what we want to talk about is how easy or how to navigate training your firefighters at your fire hall, at your fire department, how to get them to be part of this standard. So within this particular standard, it lays out what's known as the minimum job performance requirements for being a level 1 or 2 firefighter. We'll look at this document right away. We'll see exactly what that means as well. It does not give a how-to. It sets out the minimum requirements. It sets out topics that you need to understand. It sets out skills that you need to be able to perform, but it doesn't tell you how to do it. And that's where going back to these guys, this gives you a little bit more how to. However, it's not the be all end all. This, however, is saying you must be able to perform this particular task. And maybe you learn about how to perform that particular task in action training online. What it does reference multiple times, maybe even hundreds of times throughout this document, and many documents like this, is the NFPA 1001 standard is very specific to how you do something at your fire department. What are your standard operating procedures or guidelines? I'm not going to get into the difference between those. There really isn't much. They'll both be held in court. But anyway, fire department standard operating procedures. What do you do at your fire department? So, for example, this is one I see all the time. Donning a self-contained breathing apparatus, donning an SCBA. Somewhere along the way, somebody in Saskatchewan and even outside of Saskatchewan said, you cannot don your SCBA over the head anymore. Okay, why? Where does it say that? Where does it say that in this particular standard? Number one, you're not going to find that. Number two, maybe it says that in a training manual, or maybe somebody came across where an incident occurred. But if donning an SCBA over the head is your particular method or is a approved method in your standard operating procedures, guess what? You can do that. There is no regulation, there is no standard, there is nothing that says you cannot, unless you at your fire department say, nope, we don't allow that. All right, that's one example. And of course, there's hundreds of other examples of particular standard operating procedures that you folks should or may have at your fire department. The NFPA 1001 standard wants you to make sure that you are training towards what it is you're doing at a fire department, not necessarily what it says you're doing in this program. This is a training program. This is a training program. I think I'm beating that to death. So let's look at some specifics with the NFPA 1001 standard. Let's actually pull up the NFPA 1001 standard itself. So this is my copy. Maybe I'll wind up in NFPA jail for sharing this, but whatever. I think we need some clarification out there. So the first couple pages just kind of go through background behind the document. Then we have our table of contents. The NFPA standard breaks things down by chapters. You will hear different chapters referenced, and the chapter talks about a particular topic. So let's look at Chapter 1, Administration. What is this about? So the scope of the NFPA 1001 document, this standard identifies the minimum job performance requirements, also known as JPRs. You'll hear that referenced many times for Firefighter 1 and Firefighter 2 professional qualifications. The purpose of this standard is to specify the minimum JPRs for service as Firefighter 1 and Firefighter 2. Pretty simple. Next thing I want to look at, we're gonna come back to this section because I really want to highlight something very important. Let's look at Chapter 3, Definitions. Authority having jurisdiction in this document, an organization, office, or individual responsible for enforcing the requirements of a code or standard. Here's a term, shall. So you shall complete a particular task. Well, shall means indicates a mandatory requirement. Should indicates a recommendation that is advised but not necessarily required. Moving down, Firefighter 1 is a person at the first level of progression as defined in Chapter 4, which we'll get into right away, who has demonstrated the knowledge and skills to function as an integral member of a firefighting team under direct supervision in hazardous conditions. Firefighter 2 is the person at the second level of progression as defined in Chapter 5, which we'll briefly look at, who has demonstrated the skills and depth of knowledge to function under general supervision. Okay. Chapter 4 is all about what are the requirements of being known as a level 1 firefighter. So it gives you right out of the gate. For qualification at level 1, you must, or so you shall, meet the general requirements that are specified in here. The general knowledge requirements, the general skill requirements, and the job performance requirements defined in these sections. So let's look back at a definition here. General requirements, requisite knowledge. What does that mean? It's the fundamental knowledge one must have in order to perform a specific task. What are the requisite skills? They are the essential skills one must have in order to perform a specific task. Pretty simple. Okay. Chapter 4, 1001, Level 1, to be a Level 1 firefighter. Well, how does this work? Okay, well, each section is going to lay out the general knowledge requirements and the general skill requirements you must be able to do. So looking down at 4.2, fire department communications. Well, what do you need to be able to be a level 1 firefighter? So 4.2.1, you need to know how to initiate the response to a reported emergency. Given the report of an emergency, fire department SOPs, standard operating procedures. Again, you're going to see that many, many times, and so on and so on. Well, what's your requisite knowledge? To pass this particular job performance requirements, your requisite knowledge, you need to know the procedures for reporting an emergency, your department SOPs for taking and receiving alarms, radio codes, or procedures. All right. What's the skills you need to be able to do? Well, you need to have the ability to operate fire department communications equipment, relay that information, and record information. There you go. That is one section of Chapter 4, NFPA 1001 Level 1. As you go through this entire section, this entire chapter, it's going to lay out these individual pieces. So, okay, now, as a fire department, as a training officer, well, how do we get our team members to go through the requisite knowledge? Well, multiple ways. We could go through the Essentials of Firefighting program, whether it's chapter 2, 3, I can't remember off the top of my head. That is all about fire department communications. We could watch an online module about fire department communications. We could just simply look at what are our departmental standard operating procedures. Go through, all right, this is how we do it. Let's read the manual on our particular radio or that sort of thing. That is going to give that fire department member the requisite skill or the requisite knowledge for that particular job performance requirement. Then what do we have to do? Well, once again, we need to be able to demonstrate this back that we can do this. So maybe we have a night of training where everybody is operating the radios and we run through different transmissions. We could follow the exact skill sheets that are found in the IFSTA Essentials Training Manual. We could have a radio expert come out and evaluate us as to how are we performing at our particular fire department. Again, just some different ways of going about this. Ultimately, who says that this training that we did, whether it's following that IFSTA curriculum, whether it's going through our procedures, whether it's just somebody coming out and telling us what to do, who says that that is appropriate? Well, that comes down to the authority having jurisdiction, which 99 times out of 100 is your fire chief. All right? So as long as your fire chief, as long as you as a fire department, you are documenting that you are doing training, and training could be as simple as, a lot of fire departments will say, hey, we went through chapter 2 of the Essentials of Firefighting program, or we went through this particular module on the action training online, and then we performed the skill sheets associated with it. Or as a fire chief, you might say, well, we went through 4.2.1 of the NFPA 1001 standard, and our participants went through the requisite knowledge and the requisite skills. And guess what? That is adequate documentation. That is proving that you have done, according to the authority having jurisdiction, you have done adequate training. But that's just on one piece, okay? Well, let's look at some other stuff. So I'm going to leave this document and I'm going to move over to a spreadsheet that we have. All right. Now don't get too overwhelmed by what's listed in this spreadsheet. I'm going to try to break it down a little bit better for you. Let's look at, here we go, self-contained breathing apparatus. So section 4.3.1 says that we need to be able to use self-contained breathing apparatus during emergency operations. So as a level 1 firefighter, you need to be able to do this. You need to be given SCBA and other PPE. You need to be able to do it, and you need to be able to don it correctly. You need to make sure that it's worn correctly. that you're able to use controlled breathing techniques, and so on and so on. Requisite knowledge, looking right here. Well, you need to you need to understand what are the conditions that require respiratory protection. What are the uses and limitations of SCBA? What are some common components of SCBA? And so on. What are the requisite skills? Well, you need to have the ability to control your breathing. You need to be able to replace SCBA cylinders. You need to exit through restricted passages. Again, and so on and so on. So now, what are some ways that we can meet? What are some ways that we can attain this particular job performance requirement of the 1001 standard? Well, looking at what are some action training modules that we can look at for the requisite knowledge? Okay, well, action training modules. Well, there's an SCBA introduction module and there's an SCBA use and maintenance. That would be perfectly fine. What else could we do? We could go through the entire Chapter 5 firefighter personal protective equipment module of the Essentials of Firefighting. I believe it's the same. I've got the Essentials 8th edition here. I believe it's the same in the 7th edition. What else can you do? Well, you can go through other training materials as well, Jones and Bartlett. You can go through local fire department standard operating procedures. You could have a manufacturer or distributor rep. So you could have, if you run dragger SCBAs, you could have the dragger rep come out and deliver specific training on your PPE. You could watch videos on your SCBA. This all counts as theoretical training. And it is up to you as the authority having jurisdiction what it's going to be. Just moving over here, making sure I'm looking. How do you verify the skill? Okay. So the skills that are involved. Again, you could use the Essentials of Firefighting. You could use the skill sheets that are involved with that. You could follow your standard operating procedures at the fire department. You could do, and a lot of us do this, you could do on-the-job verification. SCBA, for example. SCBA, under the Occupational Health and Safety regs of Saskatchewan, we need to be retrained every 6 months in SCBA. Well, what does retraining mean? Well, could be pretty much anything. Having your department members don an SCBA at an incident, that counts as retraining and proving that they're wearing it properly, proving that they understand what is involved. What are some other things we can do? Well, we can do dressing drills and races. That's a fun, competitive way of doing training. I've seen videos. I've seen fire departments do fun things where they're playing street hockey, wearing full turnout gear in SCBA, performing the 3-minute drill. 3-minute drill, if you're not familiar with it, it's a fun, competitive way of testing a variety of skills that involves PPE, tying knots, coupling and uncoupling hose. Reach out to me if you want more info on that. I want to get a video posted of that too. Performing basic search and rescue techniques. We see a lot of this where guys will black out masks or search around in fake smoke, that sort of thing. I'm not a big fan of blacking out masks for some philosophy reasons, but you know what? If that's all you can do, if that's all you have access to, it's a way of verifying that your personnel are utilizing SCBA. Okay, so I'm not going to beat every single one of these to death, but what this does is it shows you there's multiple ways to skin this cat of training our fire department members and training them to what's internationally known as the minimum training standard for our fire department members. As you go through this document, you will see, let's move on down to Here we go, 4.3.8. Well, you got to make sure that you're training guys on how to extinguish fires in Class A materials. This could be, stacking up some pallets. It could be, if you have a building that's been donated or some hay bales. How are we approaching this? Well, again, we got to have requisite knowledge on what we need to do. Requisite knowledge needs to go through the types of attack lines, what size of hose, what are some different fire streams, what are some safe approaches to use to attack this car that's on fire? How do we overhaul it? Requisite skills. Okay, again, how do we safely, what are the actions that we're taking? How do we safely take these actions? 4.3.9, conduct a search and rescue in a structure. So what you'll see is, and for those of you that are familiar with training programs, you'll see the training programs are built around this standard itself. You'll actually even find references to the NFPA 1001 Chapter 4 job performance requirements within those training programs. But again, it is a way of doing it. Your standard operating procedures, you as the fire department, the fire chief, you are determining what is your approved way of performing a particular task. The only time that you can run into where something is stating otherwise is when an occupational health and safety regulation or there's an overarching statement made in a higher piece of legislation that you should be doing something differently. And that's, SCBA, for example. We must retrain on SCBA every 6 months. Speaking of retraining, now, something that I hear over and over again, and unfortunately I see over and over again, is somebody will say, oh, well, I went to a training school or seminar and I was trained on search and rescue there. So I don't need to do it again. I've already got that certificate. Well, first of all, a certificate doesn't mean a whole lot. A certificate means that you were trained once. That's about it. In the NFPA 1001 standard, 1.2.6, firefighter 1 and firefighter 2 level individuals shall, guys remember that term shall? It means it is mandatory, remain current with the general knowledge, skills, and job performance requirements addressed for each level or position of qualification, which means that, for myself, I remember in 2009 or 10, I went to a firefighter college and I got my NFPA 1001 level 1 and level 2 professional qualifications. That is fantastic. So I've got this fancy dancy certificate. However, according to this standard, it is saying that unless I remain current with the general knowledge skills, especially the skills aspect, which simply means I must be doing these tasks for my certification or my training to actually mean something, which goes back to the adage that you as a fire department member, you have to train, you have to practice, whether it's weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, whatever it is that your fire department is doing, you have to be there. You have to go to training. It doesn't matter what certification you have to be there. And guess what? You're going to find that line in all of these other NFPA standards. So here's another one. Hazardous materials. Those of you that have been trained in hazardous materials awareness, operations, technician, specialist, whatever level you are, guess what? You're going to find that exact same line in the standard. Look at this. 1.2.6, personnel at the scene of a hazardous materials or a weapons of mass destruction incident in the levels of awareness, operations, and so on, shall remain current with the general knowledge and skills and JPRs addressed for each level. How about this one? Here's another one I come across a lot, 1006. Some of you will say, yeah, I got my 1006. First of all, 1006 is a whole variety of different skills. Here's all the different chapters that are involved with the 1006 standard. There's confined space rescue, there's rope rescue, there's vehicle rescue, there's ice, swift water, surface, and they all have these different levels to them, awareness, operations, tech. But guess what? We go to that same spot in this standard, 1.2.6. Technical rescue personnel shall remain current with the general knowledge, skills, and JPRs addressed for each level, position of qualification. So there you go. It's probably the most important piece that I can emphasize here today for all of you is the importance of training, retraining, and having practices at your fire department. So the next time you hear somebody say, oh, well, you know what, I already got my SCBA. Well, first of all, that means nothing to me. That means that you took training at one particular point, but are you training to my fire department standard? My fire department standard might be, well, we do retraining on these skills every 6 months or every 3 months. And in every 3 months, you've got to be able to don your SCBA in 1 minute. That could be it. That's just an example. All right. Or it could be, well, you need to go to a Saskatchewan Volunteer Firefighter Association school, and you took the particular program that they have there. That could be your standard. Okay, I'm going to move back here now. Just clicking through here, folks. Bear with me. So I hope that this is sort of giving you a general overview of what this looks like. And that 1.2.6 piece says that you shall remain current with the knowledge, skills, and JPRs. So in summary, what were we talking about today? So number one, the fire chief. The fire chief is the authority having jurisdiction. The fire chief states, and the fire chief could delegate this to a training officer, but the authority having jurisdiction dictates what the minimum training requirement is at your fire department. NFPA 1001 JPRs, so what we were looking at here, so in that chapter 4, they are specific to your operation within your authority having jurisdiction. You must retrain and practice. Training programs like IPSTA, Action Training, etc., they are a guide. They're a how-to. And you must train on your procedures and your equipment. Okay? That's the gist of what I wanted to go through with you here today. For those of you that aren't aware, Quint Services, we're local to Saskatchewan. We do a whole variety of NFPA level training. We do emergency response program development, fire and risk assessment. We provide emergency response personnel. We perform a variety of maintenance on equipment, flow testing, maintenance of fire extinguishers, maintenance of hose, and we do a lot of this stuff. We like to provide guidance. We'd like to try to provide some better understanding of all of these written requirements that we have out there. Please reach out at any, we also sell some cool stuff. Please reach out at any time with questions. You can reach out to us at info@quintservices.com. We're here to help. And we understand that being a fire chief or a small town fire department, it's a lot to navigate. We're here to help you navigate, even when you don't have a very big budget. Thank you for hanging out with us, and we'll be posting more videos similar to this. Take care.